Before we begin, I will hope you will join me in acknowledging the history, culture, and stewardship of the land of the Indigenous people of this region. Most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We seek to live in respect, peace, and right relations with them as we live and work upon their traditional territory. My name is Kendra Campbell. I'm the TD Curator of Education and Outreach Fellow here at the Power Plant. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for one of the many programs that complement our Winter 2019 exhibition season. This January, we opened Witnessing by Alicia Henry, Same Dream by Omar Ba, and the topic of today's program, Mapping Worlds, a major survey by third-generation Inuit artist Shuvinai Ashoona. All of the exhibitions remain on view until May 12th. We could not offer programs like this without innumerable supporters. The TD Ready Commitment is the presenting sponsor of our Winter 2019 exhibitions and also of this particular event. We also thank BMO for their continued support of the Power Plant's All Year, All Free initiative, which provides free admission and access to our exhibitions and programming to as many people as possible. Our government funders, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Toronto Arts Council support the gallery's year-round operations. This afternoon, we are pleased to screen two films, Kinngait, Riding Light into the World, and Ghost Noise, followed by a discussion which brings together curator Nancy Campbell and director Annette Mangaard. Dr. Nancy Campbell has been a contemporary art curator for the past 20 years. She has held positions at the Art Gallery of Ontario, the University of Guelph, the McMichael Canadian Art Collection, and the Power Plant. In 2006, she curated an exhibition for the Power Plant of the work of Inuit artist Annie Putuguk that traveled nationally and internationally, propelling Putuguk to be included in Documenta 12 and winning the Sobey Art Prize in 2007. Her work with Shuvinai Ashoona began with a two-person exhibition at the Toronto Art Museum titled Noise Ghost, Shuvinai Ashoona and Sherry Boyle. Since that time, Nancy has focused her curatorial practice on the contemporary Inuit, producing many exhibitions attempting to bridge the Inuit with contemporary art. Annette Mangaard is a Danish-born Canadian artist and filmmaker whose work has been shown around the globe at galleries, cinematheques, and film festivals. Having directed more than 18 films, Mangaard has had retrospectives in Berlin, Buenos Aires, and Vancouver. She has recently completed a master's at OCAD University and will be featured in a solo exhibition at this year's Scotia Contact Photography Festival in May at the new Toronto Media Arts Centre. Josh Heuman, the Power Plant's Curator of Education and Public Programs, will moderate the discussion and integrate questions from the audience. Thank you once again for joining us, and let's start the film.
Well, fantastic. For starters, I would just like to thank all of you in the audience for coming today. The weather outside is magnificently wonderful. So thank you for holding yourselves up in a darkened theater for two really wondrous films, Kinngait, Riding Light into the World, and Ghost Noise. So of course I'm joined by Annette Mangaard and Nancy Campbell. I'll kick this off with a few questions, and then we'll start to incorporate questions from you in the audience. I guess I'll start, Annette, with you. A question about the challenges of shooting a film in Nunavut, in the north. What were some of the challenges you experienced?
Well, first of all, I lived in Baker Lake, which is another much smaller community than Cape Dorset, for a whole year when I just finished school, so I was like in my early 20s, and it was 1983, and I worked in the print shop there, and they had a similar setup. So I had a deep knowledge of killing my own food, because there was no food, and living in 60 below and darkness. And also of the people, because the culture is so different from here. And a lot of what goes on is just kind of sitting and being rather than the pace is very different and all of that. So I went in with all of that, but I think the biggest challenge was getting people to talk to another white person coming in with a camera, because there's so many people from the CBC and other places like that that go in, and what do the people get out of it? Not much, I'd say. So with this film, I think that the approach, we were trying to be a little more community-minded, and I in particular really wanted to do something that would make people feel proud of what they were doing, and especially for young people, because for young people up there, it's a very different environment. They see television and they see this world that they don't have the same access to, and they want things, and to make them also see the value of all these great things that are going on in their community. I think that was something that I really wanted to do, and that was challenging.
Great, well, thank you.
And the cold was challenging.
And the actual climate, I assume.
Yeah, batteries freeze very fast at that temperature.
So then turning to Nancy, I suppose a very similar question. What are some of the challenges of working on a project with Shuvinai Ashoona, and of course, in particular, the exhibition that is now on at the power plant?
Well, the challenges are outweighed by the benefits, that's for sure. I'm very fortunate and blessed that I can go up to Cape Dorset, and I've had 15 years of talking to Shuvanai, and I think to agree with Annette that really you have to have a relationship with people up there before they'll talk. It took a number of trips just sitting, and once the artists learn that you're a nice person, or you're coming back, or there's a relationship formed, as with any artist. I don't think that's specific to the Arctic, but certainly it's exacerbated by the fact there's so few people that are able to continually come back. So I've worked with Shuvanai for a long, long time, and as you saw in the second film, she's unique personality with some challenges in communication. And so we over the years found ways to communicate and are very good friends now. And, it's more a delight. The challenges are very few.
Well, that's very great to hear. And so then I suppose, because the two of you do have such exposure to what's going on at the co-op, having that sort of insider view that, I certainly lack, and I assume most of the people in our audience don't have either. What would you say sort of makes Shuvinai stand out among her peers? Not to say that her work is, quote unquote, better, but it's substantively different in ways. So, perhaps the two of you could share some thoughts on that.
Well, you're the expert, so I should go first. I think that her work has her soul on paper. It's lyrical, it's honest, it's intuitive, it's genuine, it's really powerful because it's the truth. That's what's inside her head. And yes, as you could see in the second film in particular, she's got a lot of challenges. And also living in a community like that, the challenges are good and bad because people are they help each other and they look after each other, but there are times where I think people take advantage of each other as well.
Shuvanai is certainly unique. I came to Inuit art not the typical way. I was a contemporary art curator. In fact, I worked at the power plant in the early 2000s as a curator, and had been to the north prior jobs, but met the artists in 2003 or 4 when I was up in Cape Dorset, and I came at it as a contemporary art curator. I saw the work of, specifically Annie and Shuvinai, and was very invested in Canadian contemporary art made by women, and not specifically, but typically up north, more women draw than men, but there's certainly a wide variety of artists, especially in the early days. As you could see, the studios were full. Unfortunately, watching the film was bittersweet for me because so many of these artists have passed away, and passed away at a relatively young age. So that was kind of sad. But I always had an interest in Annie and Shuvinai. They're first cousins, for those of you who haven't been over to see the exhibition, and I encourage you to go if you have a few minutes after this short conversation, and I'll be there for a few minutes to answer some questions. But I found both these women, I looked at them through what we call the contemporary lens, and I saw them as contemporary artists, and I was really, thought what I could add to the conversation of Inuit art is that it is changing, it is contemporary, it is Canadian, and it should be seen at places like the power plant, not specifically, back, I'm talking now, we're almost at the 2015, 20-year mark. The Inuit art section at the National Gallery was in the basement, and never did it come upstairs. So I think with the 2006 exhibition of Annie Pudugu, really it brought a whole new audience to this work. I'm not saying all Inuit art is that way, but certainly for me, these two women, and I've spent 15 years advocating for their work and publishing and making exhibitions along with other artists. But they were the two that initially really stood out for me as a curator, and I'm one of the few people, I think, in the cultural industry of curating, filmmaking, that you can spend a really long time going very deep into an artist's practice. And I'm just, again, so blessed that I've been able to do that.
Well, thank you both.
Can I say one thing?
Yes,
that
please.
show is amazing. You did a brilliant job. It's really, really worth going to see if you haven't seen it. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you. So, and I'd also like to get sort of both of your perspectives on just how truly remarkable Kinngait Studios is as part of the co-op. You raised the point of so many artists passing much too young, but I guess I see the studio and the art making as really such a major driver of the community. Again, I haven't been up there, so perhaps from your perspective, what is the real impact of this?
I think that the community survives economically because of the co-op. And there was one point in the film where early on Bill said something about, people come in and they do a drawing and they get $35 or $40. And when I remember thinking, I need to clarify that, because I would think that people would think, they're getting taken advantage of, or they're not getting paid enough for their work. But there's a big scale, and that shows how much people will get paid. And they do get paid a lot more. In fact, there's a lot of people, and that's their way of making a living. And without it, they wouldn't have anything. And there isn't much of an economy up there. And when I went to Baker Lake, there wasn't running water, there was no television, there were no phones, there was no cafe, there was nothing. So basically you had to look after yourself. And so if you think about communities in a harsh environment where now, we down here, global warming, we've destroyed the environment. So food is not as readily available. Like when I was up there last, then in Cape Dorset, I was talking to hunters who said, we can't hunt anymore because the sea ice is gone because of global warming. And so that's destroying, our way of life. We can't feed our families. It's a big problem. The co-op alleviates some of that. And the store is also part of the co-op system. So, the fact that people do get money back from all of that, really helps a lot. That makes a huge difference in a place like that. But with money, other things come in, drugs and alcohol, and there's a lot of problems, and I feel very responsible.
Sort of like living on the edge of the earth maybe exacerbates certain issues.
It does a lot, yeah. The distance, the travel distance, the weather, all of it. And we're not helping.
And maybe just to add another spin to it, I think, it is a shame that so many of the artists have passed away, because it is an apprenticeship program up there where they work collectively in the studios. And if there's no elders to lead by example, it starts to deteriorate. But you also have to think of things as constantly changing. The North is constantly changing. You look at 1959, that's not that long ago. Many of us were born at that time, or lived at that time. And a lot has changed. Like just looking at Annette's film, from the way of life in, the 50s to now. And looking forward, the artists art was brought in as a economic engine for the community. And now, some of the women, mostly the women, I must say, are getting, extra training, becoming nursing aides, teaching aides. They've got different schooling system in Iqaluit at Nunavut College. So a lot of the young women who I see have promise in terms of art making are teachers, and so they don't need to draw anymore. And so they're working, and that's great. But I think this idea of being an artist as a passion is very, very new up there. It's really a vocation, as it is in the South as well. Don't get confused. But it was an option for people in the 50s and 60s as a way of making money, or making money in retirement when you couldn't go out and hunt anymore. Or, you wanted to socialize with other women in the community, and you would go and draw. So I don't know what is going to happen. I am saddened when I go up, because there's fewer and fewer people at the studios. And but we have to remain open-minded. On the upside, perhaps more kids will graduate from high school. It might be that the communities can't sustain themselves, but that doesn't mean the art won't sustain itself. And we're here in a visual art context, so rather than get into the macro, I'll go micro and just say that the Inuit artists, particularly that are making film and who are doing music and dance and performance, like someone like Tanya Tagak, like amazing. So it is changing. It's like when we saw Annie's work and Shuvinai's work, it's not what we expected to see, because it wasn't a Kanoyuak enchanted owl. But now we see Shuvinai's show and we go, wow, that's amazing. Like this artist is amazing. And then you see Tanya, that's not throat singing, but it is. The sewing is coming back. What's that going to look like in terms of fashion? So rather than being pessimistic, I'm optimistic, but it is going to change. And, certainly you can't replace the exquisite beauty of the original 59 print release, but that was a time, and we're now in a new time. So I think as art lovers, keep an open mind, and it will change.
Great. And so, of course, I'd like to take some questions from the audience as well, if anyone out there has a question. There is a microphone available. As people are pondering,
Or we could go back to the exhibition and
yeah.
chat.
So as people are pondering that, Nancy, I hope that perhaps you could address, I don't know, like some of the prominent themes that you were really sort of looking to explore with this exhibition?
Well, Shuvanai, this is her first major museum show, so that's super fantastic, and I don't know why it hasn't happened before. And I was very intentional about it happening at the power plant because it's a contemporary art center and has an international scope, and I think that's where she should be seen. And you know, you can take many paths as a curator. I know what my overriding feeling, knowing Shuvinai as a person, is she's a very loving person, very funny person. She delights in her drawings, and I was showing some friends prior to coming over here, just look very closely at the drawings because she inserts tiny little things, and I've seen her drawing and laughing, like she's having a great time doing these drawings. And I also liked her vision of the world. I always have. You'll notice the people have red hair, have white skin, have brown skin, have blue eyes, have a Mounties, have, which is what you carry the baby in. And like her world vision is very big. She just doesn't draw her community. Certainly she's traveled. She's been to Iqaluit and Ottawa. She's seen many kinds of people. You know, I'm not naive enough to think she's only going to draw Inuit people like they would have in the 50s. But, you know, her world is so expansive and I think full of joy. And I was, although there are some really tragic moments in her life, but that was where I was going with this exhibition. And I spoke with some of the elders. Jimmy, who was in the film, is still alive, thank God. And he just said, make sure people in Toronto see the good things about Cape Dorset, because they're very, very proud of the community, and there are some beautiful things about it. So, you know, although there's a lot of monsters and kind of, you know, perhaps demons, I followed a more positive, I wanted to engage in a more positive presentation. And there's also a book that I wrote from the Art Canada Institute that's available online. And this exhibition was modeled kind of on that research. So not specific, but, you know, in general. And I think when I look at the show, I think it really represents my interaction with Shuvanai, and that's really all I can offer.
Great. Question from the audience?
So I guess my question, I think you addressed it a little bit, but I'm still curious, like the thing that jumps out to me is, I guess, negotiating the ethics of the economic arrangement of Kinngait Studio, which it sounds like has sort of shifted over time from this understanding of it's a middleman to like now it's an Inuit-owned co-op. But to me, it still seems like a bit of a prickly ethical dilemma to be paying artists a very low fixed rate and then selling their art, you know, in a major city. So I'm just curious how you two think about that, or if maybe your opinion has changed, because I've heard of a variety of opinions, and I'm still trying to, I guess, gather enough information to have my own opinion about what Kinngait kind of represents.
It is Inuit owned. So it's Inuit owned and run. Bill, the white person that you saw at the beginning of the film, he is the person who's hired by them to work with them because he's a master printer, and that's really important with lithography. But they're making money for themselves and for the community.
I guess I just think, like, relative to, let's say, a Carfax fee or something, it seems, I don't know because I don't actually know what they're getting paid, but like it seems that there's still a disparity between what's happening as far as how artists are being compensated up north and what you would expect as an artist coming out of art school in Toronto. No,
there's some people up there who are making a lot of money. There was one scene where, who was it, Parr, who came in with a sculpture, and I saw how much money he got paid, and I was told, you have to blur that out in the film because we don't want the other artists knowing that he's making this. He doesn't want the other artists knowing that he's making this much money for his sculptures. So it really has to do with the quality of the work. And when Bill was saying some artists are making $35 for a drawing, it's because they're drawings that are not really going to be sold. So they're still supporting the people by giving them some money, but there's a lot of work that is made that isn't sold, right? And so they just give money for drawings to people to support the community. And part of what's been happening lately is that when Terry left and then Jimmy was taking over, Jimmy's from the community, and he didn't like having to make the decisions about how much to pay people because it's so hard. You know, he was emotionally involved, and it was like, you know, okay, so this art, I know it's not going to sell, but I'd like to give this person more money, but I can't because we can't afford it. And so he found that really, really challenging. And I don't think he wanted to do that anymore, which is probably why he was wanting to go.
It's a very, very, very complex story, and if you're interested, I can give Josh, some excellent material that was part of my research into the co-op. And for Cape Dorset, it's worked out really well. I have no question for someone like Shuvinai. It's the perfect storm for her because she can make work in a warm environment, get her materials. The artists are ranked in terms of, how much they're paid. I think Inuit art in general is too low, but that has nothing to do with a cooperative system. It will change. The co-ops were there and served a purpose. Like Annette said, it's also the store. They supply the fuel, the water truck, the mechanics. It's Inuit owned and operated. The art arm is a very small arm, and it's been really, really successful in Kinngait, but not in some other communities. I think it's our nature as Southerners to question these things, and certainly when I came to it, I had the same questions, that we all have. But all I can say is for Kinngait, it's really worked well. And again, to go back to what I was saying previously, it is going to change over time. I don't know when, I don't know how. Certainly now the prints are not as popular as the drawings are, where before people only bought prints. The carvers are using power tools, so you don't get the same craftsmanship that you, not always, but generally. So, it's a culture that has been so accelerated and really needed the support of the co-op, to get it going. But where it goes from here, Shuvanai certainly has paid Carfax for the power plant. She sold out her show at Feely Fine Arts. She won the Gershon Iskowitz Prize, earned the Gershon Iskowitz Prize. Big difference there. But, and the co-op is managing this change because Inuit artists never had exhibitions at the power plant, or earned a significant prize. Certainly when Annie won the Sobey Prize, that was like unheard of. No one knew what to do, and it was a big money prize. And then she went to Documenta, and no one could, you couldn't pay people to come to go look at Documenta. Annie, she went, and we had to have an interpreter, and it's a brave new world up there, and things are changing so fast. But as the Arctic has changed so much in the last 50, 60 years, it's, the next 10 years, it will be a new normal. And that's what I've learned, having the privilege of working up north, is that it is so dynamic, and all of our assumptions as Southerners, you have to put them in the back seat and go up north with a different or no expectation, because it's very, very different.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? I see a hand up. Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you speak about Shuvinai's worldview, her relationship to Christianity, the world of spirits that her ancestors shared, and her interpretation of it?
I can touch on it. Shuvanai doesn't give direct answers very often, and as a curator and a researcher, I'm very hesitant to put words in her mouth. I know she does have a mental illness that was onset in her 20s. I'm not at any position to comment on that, but they did. Are you talking about the film specifically? What you saw in Marcia's film?
Like when you look at her planets, her use of planets, and the layering of animals and people, does she have a system that she talks about, or it just keeps emerging and she doesn't have?
No, I think, well, in Marcia's film, there was that church scene, and they did attempt to exorcise her when she was in her 20s. So I do know that to be true. But in terms of the exhibition and the pictures that have a lot of, planets, it's a globe, but it's not a replica of Earth. There's no continents where they're supposed to be. But I think this is just, I don't think it's a spiritual thing. I think if you get her to speak, like it's always about people getting along, people getting together, worlds birthing worlds. I'm a small person in a big universe. It's a motif, certainly, but I wouldn't say it's a spiritual one. She would not call herself like a religious person, certainly, but I certainly think she's a spiritual person. The demons and monsters, we can only guess at, it's what Annette said. She lives in her head. She has a fantastic imagination and probably a very complex and sophisticated inner life.
We have one final question.
Oh, yes.
Hello, thank you for this. It was really quite interesting. I have a question in regards to Annie Putanuk. As you've mentioned, she's achieved a lot of success with Documenta and the Sobey Award, and yet she had a very sad passing. And as far as I know, she was quite poor. And could you speak to those challenges to artists such as her, Inuit artists?
Well, as far as I know, she's the Inuit artist who has had that experience. The Sobey came with a $50,000 cash prize. And that is a lot of money for anyone. That money allowed her to move to Ottawa. She was keen to get out of Cape Dorset, much to the community's dismay. But if you know much about the work of Annie Putanuk, she was a very troubled woman her whole life. The early drawings show, like this. I think the assumptions made and the way that the Globe and Mail in particular has written about her is that she moved to Ottawa, she left the co-op, she stopped drawing, she spent all her money and was a drug addict and drowned in the Rideau River. Which I guess if you were to break down the story is true, but the story, as in any complex story, is much more tragic than that. Annie had a lot of issues when she lived in Cape Dorset. She had a huge problem picking men and relying on alcohol and drugs to ease her pain. I think, what Annette was saying earlier too is that you can't assume, it's a very hard life up in Cape Dorset, and she wanted out, and she made choices that ultimately didn't work out for her. And also, as Annette said, Inuit in Cape Dorset or Baker Lake are very generous people, but can also get taken advantage of. So, same with someone like Shuvinai. Shuvinai supports about 20 of her family members. Kanoyuak in that film supported probably half of Cape Dorset. Annie, when she won that prize, moved down to Ottawa to what is known as the Inuit Ghetto, but a lot of Inuit people live in this community, and I visited Annie there, and there was lineups of people at the door, and Annie would just give her money to them. It's a very sad story, and if you want to know more, I wrote a book that was was published with the exhibition last year at the McMichael, and it's published by Goose Lane, and it kind of goes into that story. But this is what I'm talking about looking forward, is Annie was ill-equipped. The co-op at that point was ill-equipped with a $50,000 prize. Now that Shuvinai's earned the Gershon Iskowitz, there's a lot more prudence. Of course, she's an adult and can do whatever she wants, and I would never, for one instance, assume that, we could take care of her money for her. But I think the co-op is on, alert of these issues, and it was a learning curve, because no Inuit artist has won a $50,000 prize for artists under 40. Like, it was amazing. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's a very uncomfortable topic for me to talk about, because it's, so sad, and I still wish she had gone back to Cape Dorset or got herself together. And artists have, like Uvulu Tunuli, certainly amazing female sculptor, but she, everyone thought she was, and she resurrected her career and her health, and there's a long history of artists behaving badly, and that is one of the stories. It is a very complex and sad story, but she was a very lovely person.
So picking up on your comment, Nancy, earlier about working with the Art Canada Institute, just informing everyone that the power plant is working with the ACI to present a book launch and book signing with Nancy on Thursday, March 28th of the Shuvinai Ashoona publication. So we hope some of you might come on down for that. And we're just after 4 o'clock, and the power plant remains open until 5. So if you don't stick around with any questions for Annette or Nancy here, perhaps we'll all drift in the direction of the power plant, and you can enjoy Shuvinai's work in the galleries. Thank you so much for coming today.